The NBA salary cap guidelines are outlined in its collective bargaining agreement, a contract negotiated between players and owners that determines all the rules for the operations of the league. In the current CBA, the NBA salary cap is calculated by multiplying the league's projected income by about 45%, then take away projected player benefits like health and welfare benefits, and then divide the result by the number of NBA teams, 30. Unlike the NFL and NHL, the NBA has a soft salary cap. This means you can go above the cap, but you must qualify for an exception. However, there's a penalty for going too far above the salary cap that forces teams to pay a luxury tax. Qualifying for an exception to go above the cap is not hard to do. Here's a brief list of all the exceptions a team can use. Some of the most commonly used exceptions are bird exceptions, mid-level exceptions, and minimum salary exceptions. The NBA didn't have a salary cap until 1987. Unfortunately, just weeks earlier, the Boston Celtics had just signed this dude to a 7-year deal that put them past the cap limit. Enter the bird right exceptions. This exception said that if a player is with the same team without being waived or leaving in free agency, he is eligible for a 5-year max deal, even if that puts them over the cap limit. This is the exception that the Golden State Warriors used to sign Steph Curry to his deal. Also in this bird rights category is an exception for a player to re-sign with a team using early bird rights. If a player has been with the same team for 2 years before hitting free agency, he can sign for up to 175% of his previous year's salary or the current average salary, whichever is greater. There's also a non-bird exception, in which a player can sign a deal with the same team where he finished the previous season for up to 4 years with a starting salary up to 120% of his previous year's salary. The mid-level exception value was $9.25 million this year, but the value is less for teams who are over the luxury tax threshold. The exception essentially gives teams a $9.25 million allowance to spread across multiple players' contracts. The Golden State Warriors signed 7 players this year using this exception. The minimum salary exception allows teams to sign an unlimited number of players to the minimum salary if they are over the cap. This and traded player exceptions are generally how contenders continue to add rotational pieces when they are well over the cap limit. As we talked about earlier, if you use these exceptions and go far enough above the cap, you'll have to pay a penalty called a luxury tax. The further you go above the cap, the more you pay in luxury tax. Nobody has ignored that luxury tax quite like the 2014 Brooklyn Nets. In 2013, Brooklyn Nets owner Mikhail Prokhorov chose to give out max contracts like LeBron gives out championship predictions.
Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7.
The full roster looked like this and pushed the Nets past the luxury threshold by over $30 million. The more you go over the threshold, the more you have to pay. The Nets topped out at nearly 500% tax on each dollar and paid a total of around $100 million in contracts and $90 million freaking dollars in luxury tax. By the way, that team won 38 games. For comparison, the highest spending team this year, the Portland Trail Blazers, spent just under $6 million or around 5.5% of the cap in luxury tax. This money collected from the luxury tax doesn't go into the commissioner's pocket. 50% is put into revenue sharing, and then the other 50% is actually redistributed to all of the NBA owners, bringing even less incentive to go over that cap limit. There is heavy pressure for the NBA owners to stay under this cap limit, and when they do break the limit, to keep it low. In 2015, the NBA added a repeater tax that is even worse for teams that have paid a luxury tax for at least 3 of the last 4 years. The CBA also sets a minimum spend for each team, called a salary floor. Teams are required to spend at least 70% of the cap, or they will need to make up the difference by paying more to their existing players. This helps prevent serious tanking efforts.
Just a process.
Thanks, Joel.
The salary cap had an unprecedented spike in the 2016-17 season that triggered a free agent signing frenzy. Overall, the cap limit has doubled in the past 10 years, bringing larger max deals to top players. However, if you look at the minimum contract limits over the last 10 years, they've only risen by about $150,000. There's a current predicted cap of $118 million for the 2021 season.